Hello, welcome to this video on icons and the inevitability of icons from a theological and from a psychological perspective. You'll also notice that if you've watched my videos before, you'll notice that I've cut my hair and I've trimmed my beard. And that was due to Mrs. Doc Jones insisting I do so to attend a wedding. So that's why I look quite different. But anyway, let's crack on. I'm also changing the way I'm doing things a little bit these days because usually I just sort of, waffle on without a script. I just talk about whatever the idea is, whatever it is I want to do a video on. Now I'm actually writing scripts, so and then reading the script or referring to the script while I do the video. We'll see how that works. I imagine it'll be an improvement, but let's see. Anyway. When we use the word symbolic, we often mean it in a modern secular sense. And so a symbol points to something, but it isn't that thing. It's like a unidimensional simile, a sign that points to whatever the original subject matter is. X is like Y. In Catholic and Orthodox tradition, an icon is more akin to a manifestation that allows us to participate in the subject of the icon, the referent. From this point of view, a painted image or a carving of Jesus Christ, whom Catholics like myself would regard as God, when we contemplate the image and we fix our attention upon it, it both represents and mediates the presence of Christ to us, and we participate in that presence in that moment. This is known as latreia. It is the highest form of worship, and it is reserved for God himself. The icon mentioned, so this, let's say a carving of Jesus Christ, cannot show for us God's divine essence. That is beyond earthly understanding and beyond what we can perceive and what we can kind of render into art form. But it can bring to us the reality of the incarnate God, and through him, divine grace is then communicated to us. I should point out that worship is hierarchical from a kind of Christian perspective, and this has consequences for iconography. If I were to contemplate a painting of St. Thomas Aquinas, and during my contemplation ask him to intercede on my behalf, so to pray to God for me, I would be participating in dulia, which is veneration of a created being. If I were to contemplate the form of the Virgin Mary by kneeling before a statue of her and praying to her and asking her to intercede for me, to pray to God for me, I would be participating in hyperdulia, which is the highest form of veneration bestowed to a created being, and that is reserved solely for Mary in Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Both of these forms of worship are subordinate to latreia and point to God. So they rest below that in the hierarchy. And there are means of achieving that anyway, because you're asking for the intercession of others. In the same way as I might ask my mum to pray for me, when she goes to church. Except that, she is here, and so separate from God in the sense that, she is living within his creation, within time, within space, not actually with him. And close in that sense. If I was to pray directly to the images that I just described, and pray to them as though they were divine beings, that would be idolatry. So to misattribute divine authority to an object is idolatry. To perceive divinity through an object is iconography. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states that The sacred image, the liturgical icon, principally represents Christ. It cannot represent the invisible and incomprehensible God, but the incarnation of the Son of God has ushered in a new economy of images. And that's based on the thinking of 8th century St. John Damascene of Damascus, who said, previously God, who has neither a body nor a face, absolutely could not be represented by an image. But now that he has made himself visible in the flesh and has lived with men, I can make an image of what I have seen of God and contemplate the glory of the Lord, his face unveiled. So that's the thinking behind iconography and why we use them in the church. In discussing icons as paintings and carvings, we are limiting symbolic objects to physical objects, though. In themselves, symbolic representations of our love for God by the labour that goes into creating them, which in turn is a dim reflection of God's love for us. So in that sense, paintings and carvings, they are important. They have that added symbolic value. However, the iconography of the church is a distillation of reality outside of the church. We participate in reality as a whole via participation in symbolic objects all the time. Okay. So this is because we as human beings think and communicate primarily through spoken or subvocal language. And language is itself a hierarchical network of symbolic objects known as words. When a speaker utters a word such as cow, no animal is present. Instead, a sound is emitted from the speaker's anatomy, from their lungs, their throat, their head and neck, and out comes the sound, just sound waves. This sound evokes in the listener a mental image and perhaps a wider conceptual representation of a cow, such as thoughts of farms and milking and mooing and personal memories of cows, perhaps. Thus, this bringing into reality the symbolic object of the word cow causes the listener to participate in the wider truth of the referent, which in this case is cow. Okay? So now the symbolic object is not an external object, an external painting or what have you, a work of art. It's internal, it's private, it's words. The current dominant psychological theory of human thought is something known as relational frame theory, or RFT. I use this a lot in my in clinical work. RFT claims that we humans perceive and make sense of reality through the development of networks of symbolic relations, which are ordered into relational frames. In this way, RFT explains how people make connections between otherwise arbitrary stimuli. RFT relies on three processes. So a little lesson in cognitive psychology here. An example of the first is called mutual entailment. And it goes like this. If I usually switch off the light before going to bed, going to bed will make me think of switching off the light. Maybe in linguistic terms, I need to switch off the light, or perhaps as a mental image constructed from previous times I turned off the light. Or both. The second process is combinatorial entailment. Sorry. If I tell my child, this is an example of this, if I tell my child that they should switch off the light before bed, then one day I tell them to knock the light off before bed, explaining that knock off is another way of saying switch off. And then on another night, I tell them to turn off the light and explain that turn off is another way of saying switch off. They will automatically equate turn off and knock off without me having to explain that these wordings are also analogous. They'll just make that connection. There'll be a frame forming. Um, the third process is called function transformation. And this means if I usually look forward to going to bed after a hard day's work, I'm continuing this example of going to bed, turning off the light might evoke in me positive feelings of relief. Kind of sleep after a hard day, great. If I have a very bad nightmare one night, though, and I wake up from it, cold sweat, really quite traumatic, the next time I turn off the light before I go to bed, I'm going to feel quite different about the prospect of going to bed now. So that the function has transformed. The stimuli, my response to the stimuli is now different, and because of that previous experience. So RFT states these three processes are necessary for the development of relational frames. And I say all this because RFT maps on to what theologians have known for centuries, maybe millennia. Okay, this is because relational frames constitute the building blocks of meaning, allowing humans to respond to the symbolic objects of words and memories as if they were the realities that they represent. In theological terms, this cognitive process mirrors the function of the icon, a form through which the invisible becomes intelligible and participatory. Just as a word evokes relational networks of meaning without the physical presence of its referent, whatever that may be, so too an icon evokes relational participation in its referent. So God, ultimately God, even if that is mediated through a node like a saint or Mary, the referent ultimately is always God. This, of course, means that icons are not limited to paintings and carvings. They are any external or internal stimuli. A song of worship is an icon because it represents the subject of the song as the referent, so God, and allows us to participate in the presence of that referent. As does prayer, whether it's spoken aloud or it's repeated subvocally in our minds. Both manifestations of the prayer are made up of symbolic objects, words, that act as icons. So, according to modern cognitive psychology and ancient theology, iconography is inevitable all the time. It's just the most explicit examples of iconography that you find on the walls of a church. But we're all engaged in iconography, always. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope somebody got something from that.